We here at John Jay College of Criminal Justice would like to welcome you to the last series of conversations about 9/11. Today, the topic is service and giving back. I'm Dr. Henry Smart, an assistant professor with the Department of Public Management at John Jay, and I will be your moderator. We will have this flow of discussion. We'll do introductions, some reflection. We'll talk, most of our discussion will focus on service and deeds in response to 9/11. And we will talk about how we move forward in terms of future service. I'd like to begin with introductions, starting in alphabetical order. Gary Bagley. Since 2009, Gary has been the executive director of New York Cares. He is an appointee to the State Commission on National Community Service and serves on the board of directors of the National Urban Fellows. He is connected to the arts community. For example, he has helped with the design and implementation of 12,000 arts in education programs in 250 schools, and he was a teacher with Tara for 7 years and the director of education for 4.
Yeah.
Gary is an adjunct professor of the International and Public Affairs School at Columbia University and Baruch College. Lisa Orloff. Lisa is the president of Resiliency Advisors and chair of World Cares Center, a nonprofit organization she founded in the aftermath of 9/11. She's an author, a visiting assistant professor at multiple colleges. We'll hopefully find out which ones those are, and an advanced disaster assessment team leader and a firefighter. She has played a key role in the development of curriculum based on lessons learned from 9/11, and she has received awards for her work related to the disaster and Hurricane Irene, which includes the Mayor's Voluntary Action Award, the MLK Jr. Award, and she has also received recognition from the New Jersey State Police. Vilma Torres. Vilma is a graduate of Hunter College of School of Social Work, which eventually leads to social justice. Since that time, she has provided service as a social worker and an advocate, a provider, and a leader for other change agents. Vilma has served the NYC community for over 34 years via Safe Horizon, where she is currently the staff director. But some of her previous roles at Safe Horizon run the gamut from intern to director. Vilma has counseled families of murder victims, led counseling groups, and attended court hearings in support of these families. She has also provided similar support for families impacted by 9/11. In 2013, she was awarded the Champions Award for her work with the Families of Homicide Victims Department within Safe Horizons. Jay Winuk. Jay is the founder and executive vice president of 9/11 Day and My Good Deed. He's an advocate for volunteerism and national service, and this is evidenced by his role in starting the September 11th National Day of Service and Remembrance. He has received several acknowledgments for his service contributions. For example, in 2011, President George H.W. Bush and the Points of Light Institute awarded him with the Daily Point of Light Award for creating meaningful change in communities across the country. He is a frequent public speaker, which is his discipline, and has given invited talks on topics around 9/11 at numerous institutions like Indiana University, George Washington University, and Columbia University. I'd like to personally thank our guests for taking time out of their day to discuss an important topic, but I'd also like to thank John Jay's Teaching and Learning Center and the External Affairs Division for organizing this event. So without further ado, let's get into our discussion. Now, before we delve into the main topic of service, I would like all of you to take a pause for a moment for those that were lost in the 9/11 attacks. And thank you for that. Now, to our panelists, I'd like for you to reflect on September 11, 2001. It is evident that the events that occurred that day moved all of you to act in some way. So if you could, please take a few moments to share the details of your day on 9/11, 2001 and how that day is connected to your current service. I'd like to start with Jay, And for everyone that follows Jay, just organically chime in.
Oh, sure. And thank you for that introduction, Henry. Well, I'm a 9/11 family member. My brother Glenn was a partner at a law firm called Holland and Knight, and that was located, their offices were located at 195 Broadway, just a few blocks from the World Trade Center. For 20 years, Glenn was also a volunteer firefighter and an EMT in our hometown of Jericho, and had served a term as Jericho Fire Commissioner of that fire district. So on 9/11, Glenn helped evacuate the Holland and Knight law offices and then raced on foot into the South Tower to save lives and perished when that tower collapsed. So the work I do is certainly in honor of him and all of those who perished or were injured or sickened as a result of the attacks. That morning, I was sitting right here where I'm sitting now, 20 years ago in my home office when the phone rang and a friend said, turn on the TV. And I did that in time to see the second tower get hit. And I knew immediately that, if Glenn was in anywhere in proximity to those towers, he'd be racing in, as he did in 1993 when the Trade Center was bombed. And so, like the same experience that all family members had that morning, you start making the phone calls and trying to figure out, where the person you loved or knew was and whether or not they were involved. And of course, we knew Glenn was, but we didn't know he was lost until sometime later.
And Jay, do you want to connect that to the current work that you're doing now?
Yeah, of course. A few months after 9/11, my friend and colleague in the public relations industry, which is the business that I'm in, contacted me. His name is David Payne, and we knew each other for some years. And he lived and worked in California, and he had this idea that 9/11 should not be just about the attacks, but about how people, not only in this country, but all over the world, were responding. And to try to create a grassroots movement where people would do good deeds on 9/11, reflecting the way that people were responding everywhere, just everywhere. We were much more focused then in the immediate aftermath on our common humanity than on the differences, which too often separate us, of course. And I thought that was a really good idea, personally, because that's the way Glenn lived his life, going out of his way and doing good deeds for people he knew and people he didn't know, certainly as a first responder, but also in the way he lived his life. But in general, I thought that was a great way to pay tribute to all of those, to create this kind of active, living recognition, this living memorial for years to come, so that future generations would understand that one appropriate, meaningful, productive way to mark the anniversary each year would be by doing good for people in need. And so we were off and running. We met with the leaders of just about every 9/11 organization that had surfaced in the aftermath to make sure that we were on the right path, that this would resonate and feel appropriate to people within the 9/11 community, and it was widely accepted. And so for several years, we just kept putting one foot in front of the other to try to build momentum and participation in this day of doing good deeds. Eventually, millions of people began participating, from something that was pretty simple. My friend and colleague who was on the panel with us, Lisa Orloff, was instrumental in the early years, as was Gary Bagley in subsequent years. So I'm so pleased to be sharing this panel with both and everybody who's participating in this conversation. But in 2009, we were successful in getting 9/11, the anniversary of 9/11, established under federal law as part of the Edward M. Kennedy Serve America Act as a national day of service. So along with MLK Jr. Day, it's one of only two such days in the country with this designation. And fast forward to this past year, and more than 38 million people marked the day by doing good deeds this past anniversary. So it's by far the largest annual day of charitable engagement in the history of the country.
That is awesome.
Thank you.
We're getting some feedback. So maybe we'll mute someone. Okay, so Lisa, and then Gary, and then Vilma. We'll take that order.
Okay. Let me see. Well, on September 11th, I should start by saying that I was just always so um, in love with New York City, even as a young child, and had um, had decided to make my career in New York City. I graduated from Fashion Institute of Technology in 1985, and I had a business. I was a fashion designer. I owned my own company, and uh, we were showing our collection, actually scheduled to show our collection at the Jacob Javits Center on September 11th. When when the when the attacks happened, like everyone else, I was in shock, and like thousands upon thousands of others, I felt like I had an obligation to take action. That I felt that everyone who had ever benefited from being in New York City, saw a show, went to college, made their career, had their families, needed to step up and do something. I was just very driven to do that. And personally, I wound up, first I went over to the piers where New York Cares was running operations. And then I was sent up to the Jacob Javits Center, where I basically began to organize the internal operations of all the volunteers in the basement of the Jacob Javits Center. So news had gotten out. There was thousands upon thousands of donations coming in, truckloads of donations, and there was a lot of volunteers, and we matched the two and began organizing the first impromptu supply chain down to ground zero. Everything happened very quickly. You know, there's an expression in disaster management: a day in a disaster is worth a month of time in just normal daily operations. And I'm sure everybody can agree with that. So we went from just personally helping out and organizing to the creation of World Care Center and a healing space called September Space, where we served 45,000 rescue workers, survivors, family members, and really became connected with other people really wanting to do good, to take this horrific day, to capture all of the goodwill that has come out of it, and to move forward together, not to forget, but to move forward together. And of course, I met Jay and I worked with Gary's team and countless others. First running the September Space Community Center, and then moving forward to make sure that we could capture our lessons learned, that truly we will never forget, means something a little bit different to everybody. And I think for myself and those that are involved with World Care Center, it really means that we have to make sure that the lessons learned that we painfully learned get carried forward in such a way and shared that people will not make the same mistakes, whether it be exposure to toxins, whether it be emotional exposure, or whether it be, understanding how to be involved in building a memorial, and how much that process is a healing process. So that is pretty much my journey and the impact and what I have done. And we've changed and morphed, but I'm sure there's going to be more questions. So I'll leave to that.
Thank you. Gary?
Hi, everybody. Gosh, hard to follow those two folks. Such rich experiences. And I think anybody who lives in New York, probably even across the country, who was an adult, thinks of 9/11 as a before and after day, right? Like our lives changed totally on that day. I was still in my previous career working in arts and arts education. And so my immediate concern was for the city and for the schools that were surrounding the center, for the number of students I knew who were in local high schools. And so it was a very kind of personal and youth-driven response because I was teaching and working with students who were, you know, in many regards, very traumatized as we were as adults. I would say then my more direct history with 9/11 started in 2004 when I joined New York Cares, and I met Lisa, I started talking to Jay, and the idea of having a national observance and a national day of service around 9/11 was so compelling from a mission perspective. And, you know, as both Lisa and Jay have talked about at the time, especially, we were trying to kind of thread that needle of both remembering the never forgetting and the looking forward. And we were really actively trying to figure out what that looked like, both as a city and as a country. So I'm pleased. I will say for New York Cares, one of the things we discovered organizationally and that moment was that the ability to bring together a large number of people who want to help, or to both attract them almost naturally at that point in our growth, as well as interact with nonprofits and public agencies who could benefit from volunteer support, but don't necessarily do that every day or do that in the ways they need in that moment, was something that we could add, if you will, to the ecosystem that it needed. And I would say, building off of the 9/11 lessons, we have developed an entire disaster readiness and response kind of unit within our organization just from these lessons learned. So it has been an amazing journey for us, and one that continues.
Thank you, Gary. Vilma?
Sure.
Yes. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. And it's an honor to join everyone here today to talk about the legacy of 9/11. I'll just start personally on that day. The immediacy, I think, Jay, you said it, like, where's everybody? You know, upon hearing the news, I did kind of like a spot check. Well, who's this? Who's there? Where are you? Where are you going? And also another concern is from my colleagues who were at right there at 2 Lafayette Street. Just like the imagination of what I heard of what they witnessed. I think that's what always reflects me, is the sense of what people saw, what they saw, and those images that still remain to this day in many survivors and clients of witnessing, of walking, of the hours of walking, trying because there were no trains. And credit to our organization and our leaders at that time, our then executive director, Gordon Campbell. Within 2 days, everybody was like back together. Everybody came under the armory as like, what can we do? Who do we help? And the beauty, I think, as the others have shared, the collaborative piece of people coming together. Maybe we don't know a lot. We're still dealing with our own emotions, but we're going to support each other. And I think that was, honestly, that was the most enriching experience, to still be in a state of shock, to be honest with you, and still have a sense of smell. I think that was one of the things, is also in being those first few days until we eventually went to the pier, is I do value the work that we do in our organization now, is the importance of self-care. Because I'll be honest with you, I was like the little Energizer bunny. You tell me to go to part A, I went to part A. You told me to go part B, I went to part B and C, and assisting families. And I'll be honest with you, I never thought of how it is impacting me. And until I got to a point where I just fell apart, the emotionality of it, working with a survivor, with the beauty of her concern for me. And I'm thinking, you're worried about me, and that got me to the point, like, wow, somebody's telling you need to take care of yourself. And I think that still remains in the work that we do in assisting trauma survivors day in, day out. And think about COVID and the pandemic. What are we doing to take some time for ourselves? Of course, be there for others, but not lose sight of valuing ourselves in this moment.
Yeah, that's a lesson you can bring forward, and it'll apply no matter what time frame you're in, 2030, 50.
Mhm.
So thank you all for that. So Gary, I think this question we'd like to start with you. So please provide a brief profile of your organization and how it lends support in times of tragedy and disaster. You mentioned the disaster readiness unit, so hopefully you can fold that into that.
Will do.
Okay.
Yeah, at this point in time, New York Cares has grown into the largest provider of volunteer-led social services in the city. In a typical year, we'll fill about 150,000 volunteer positions across the 5 boroughs. And we actually do that by running the programming at the various sites, whether it's Safe Horizon or whether it's with our partners at 9/11 Day. We were built on volunteerism. So those big 3 pillar areas of ours that made disaster response seem a very natural part of our work is about half of our work is in education. About 40% of it is in immediate needs, whether that's hunger, visiting seniors, disaster response, providing coats to New Yorkers in need at the holiday time. And then the last bit of our work, about 10% of it, is cleaning and greening the public spaces. We have a particular focus on community gardening and urban farming right now to help build the infrastructure of support and fresh food across the city. Our core work really, when I think about 9/11, when I think about disaster response in general, the way we operate is our team works with representatives from nonprofits and schools across the 5 boroughs, about 800 on an average year. We work to figure out what needs they have that volunteers are a good solution for. And then what we do on our end is we identify a volunteer team leader that is an unpaid volunteer leader who will become the on-site project coordinator and organize the efforts of the volunteers on all of our projects. So each team leader can, mobilize 5, 10, 20 other volunteers, depending on what the activity is. And that infrastructure support both allows us to go to scale, right? One staff member working with 40 or 50 team leaders and 25 or 30 agencies can make a lot of programming happen because they don't actually have to show up at every one of those projects. It also enables leadership. So I would say that infrastructure then made it very natural that post-disaster, when nonprofits, schools, city agencies are in need, and as I said before, often for things that they're not used to, right? It's a kind of support they don't do. We've seen in COVID, for instance, the number of organizations that have become hunger organizations in this moment is astounding, right? But with local churches, faith-based organizations, schools becoming food pantries, right? Because they needed to. So our ability, I think, to adapt there made this very natural for us. And I would say what 9/11 taught us was that operating model was something that could really, really help the core ecosystem, if you will, but without usurping the important work of the other groups. In many regards, we were able to say, give us this part of it, because this is what we do every day. And this way you can focus on the more important work that you have to do that's more centered on your mission.
Thank you. Vilma, you were part of an organization that existed prior to, so I'd like to hear a little bit about your profile even before disasters, even before 9/11, and how that might have changed a bit.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. And when you speak of our agency, Victims, we started back in 1978 when we were then Victim Services Agency. So it's ironic that when our organization was responding to assisting the injured, the survivors, the families, the missing, people thought that Safe Horizon just started as a result of 9/11. And we've been, I think the legacy of the organization is that you had that expertise on that, and our leadership just literally just picked us up and said, now you're taking your expertise and tools to this. And it still remains today. I mean, definitely we know the plight of anyone who's been impacted by violence and abuse. The increase of gun violence in our cities and our communities and our schools has been, you know, sadly, another shooting just this past week. So I think that's what I value is if at that time we, you know, we are there if someone needs us to come into the community, to meet with the community, to be of support. We have advocates that work at our police precincts, that work with crime victims as well as domestic violence victims, the Child Advocacy Center, our drop-in centers for street work. I mean, they're there in the moment, the here and now. And I think that's what I have the great respect of the expertise that you find in our organization and the collaborative piece that we have working with city, state, local. You know, and one of the things that I've learned as a result of 9/11 is that trauma continues forever. I mean, sadly, sometimes people feel like when it comes to grief and mourning, that you just put it in a box and it's going to be over after that first year. No, it's not. You know, those memories, those images may linger. The trauma of those first images may linger, but the missing and the missing of the person. I mean, that's the beauty that I often hear from survivors, is missing the essence of their loved one. You know, and I get emotional just talking about it when someone could say, wow, you know, he would be 30 now. Oh my goodness, let me tell you what he would be doing at 30. Or, you know, like all that, and what you're missing that essence of that person is, and that it doesn't become about how that person died, but how he or she lived. And I think that's the beauty, as you found that so many families did, as Jay spoke about, and Gary and Lisa, you know, put that to continue to help others. And I think that's the, you know, the essence of what I've learned from many families is just continuing it.
Thank you for that. So Lisa, if you want to profile both organizations or just World Care, I'll let you sort of pick them. Unmute for me. There you go.
Up.
Oh, wait, do that one more time. There
How's
we go.
that? Okay. All right. So Noah, World Care Center has really evolved with the needs of the community, and that community has grown. So today we have 3 core foundational programs that were built from our experiences as spontaneous community volunteers who came to help their own community. And what a mite we were, but also some of the pitfalls and how to overcome that. Because initially our outpouring was not necessarily received with open arms. I think, you know, we were all overwhelmed during those days, and people, those in charge were trying to figure out how and what to do with all of these people who wanted to help. Today, we've captured those lessons learned. Gary speaks of the system and the program. We follow the incident command system, and we modify that for every single citizen, every student who's doing a service learning program. You know, what we call these people are now ready responders. So they are those that seek to help. Yes, we work with Professor Velati from your wonderful institution. And so we have a training academy called the Disaster Volunteerism Academy with 4 levels of training, 1 for the average citizen, 1 for the disaster volunteer, and 1 for the manager. And we have those trainings in person, but also we have a self-paced online academy, free of charge to everyone. So if you're getting ready to respond, or you're a student getting ready to do a service learning project and you want to learn a little bit more, you can go there. We actually worked with the students from John Jay that were going to Puerto Rico and trained them before they deployed. So we have a second program, which is communication. We know that high-risk, underserved communities don't have the opportunity to connect with, okay, politically incorrect term, the big boys, right? They don't have the opportunity to get on the conference calls with Office of Emergency Management, our other well-resourced groups. So we created this virtual emergency operations center so that we could bridge the divide, the communication divide, the resource divide for these community leaders, and access and use the same tools that everybody else is. Survivors needs intake forms, tracking and engaging volunteers, communicating with others. And then the last double side of either side of the same coin is we have the boots on the ground exercise that allows individuals to practice what they've learned together with others. So it's as close as you can get to being in a disaster in a no fault, no risk environment. And we've done many of these where hundreds of individuals come out and put tools in their hand and actually practice. And we do that when we're not responding to disasters. So we take all of those lessons and we have our own response go bag where our managers, and many of them are volunteers, will go to a community impacted by a disaster, find those local leaders. Sometimes we're requested by those local leaders, and we go in there and we help them set up a volunteer reception center. And we activate their own community members, their own constituents. They didn't arrive at these disasters. The disaster has happened to them and they have the good fortune of surviving it and being able to help. And how do they remain resilient? How do they regain control? How do they become active in the solution of their community? It's to volunteer. And so we work with that local leader, and we set up a volunteer reception center. We work with those volunteers, we train them, we give them personal protective equipment, we give them tools, and they go out into the community and they help their own community recover. They no longer see themselves as a victim, they see themselves as a ready responder. And that builds the resilience of the community because they now have control, but everything that they learn, they keep, and it stays within their community. So the next time, and we know there will be a next time in one shape or form, they are ready to go. They have the tools. They work as a team, and they can help their community prepare for, respond to, or recover from disasters. And those are the things that World Care Center does. Those are the things that World Care Center teaches. And we champion that the power of the individual as a ready responder, not as a victim, not as someone asking for help, but someone saying, let me help. And out of these things that we do have become really the focus on leadership and resilience. And so that's our mantra, I think, for 2022 is leadership and resilience, while sustaining and maintaining those core programs.
Yeah, and what I heard while you were talking was empowerment and stewardship. So this very
Okay.
Yeah,
Writing that down.
Yeah, it's there. And Jay, if you could profile for us, that would be great.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And I'm so impressed with what my three colleagues have just shared before me. We, for years since we really began in earnest in 2002, have essentially been the caretakers of this National Day observance. And that takes many forms as it has grown over the years, with an education program that we provide in thousands of schools, teaching about the intersection of 9/11 and service, and a program we've done in recent years with World Central Kitchen, particularly during the COVID era, raising the money to buy meals from local restaurants, the majority of which are minority owned and which have been so hard hit by the pandemic, and having those meals delivered to first responders and healthcare workers as a way to say thank you on 9/11 for keeping us all safe. But our core program for the last 5 or 6 years has been to stage large-scale meal hacking events. to bring volunteers together en masse on 9/11 to pack meals, to stay in the communities where those meals are packed. We began first in New York City. We do this aboard the Intrepid every year, where we bring as many as 4,000 plus volunteers together in one day. Well, in pre-pandemic, we packed more than 1 million meals in one day, non-perishable meals that are then pushed out through City Harvest and Food Bank of New York and some faith-based groups. All of this is done, by the way, with the love and assistance of Gary and his team in some of the ways that he described before and how they activate people to participate. But the large majority of those volunteers are actually employees of our corporate sponsors. We provide corporations and national faith-based groups and other nonprofits with an opportunity, and first responder groups and military veterans with an opportunity to do something meaningful and productive on 9/11. And so these thousands of people come together and they pack meals. And then, as I said, we push those out to stay in the communities where those meals are packed. And I say communities because it has grown over these 5 or 6 years. First, we went from New York and expanded to 4 cities the following year, and then to 8 cities the following year. And then we had to skip during the pandemic, of course, because we could not bring thousands of people together in one space. And we shifted to a virtual 9/11 Day at-home program, which was web-based, where people could participate in doing good deeds for dozens of organizations that we provided the information about through our website. And we didn't know how that was going to work, but it was actually very successful. Tens of millions of people participated by supporting those organizations in one way or another from the safety of their homes or offices. And then we got back into meal packs again last year. We were in 10 cities, packing more than 2 million meals altogether, again, with close to 7,000 volunteers. And so this was the first year, this last year, that we actually, in some markets, opened the volunteer opportunities up to the general public. And it was really warmly received. We had great participation. One of the things that we have found in doing these meal packs in recent years, because we do research every year after the fact, to learn more, as much as we can, about who participates, what their motivations are, would they participate again, would they tell other people about it. So many of the people who participate in volunteerism on 9/11 don't otherwise participate in volunteerism. It's a point of entry that is very appealing to people who maybe have wanted to engage in volunteerism but didn't know what to do before, or just never made the effort. But there's something about marking this anniversary each year which attracts the participation of people who don't typically do this as part of what they do. And that's very gratifying. It's also gratifying to see the energy that young people put into participation in 9/11 Day each year. From the outset, one of our concerns and one of our missions was to establish a ritual in this country that could be handed off from generation to generation, so that those who did not necessarily experience 9/11, who were not alive at the time, or have no direct memories of it, as they move forward, into the future, have the opportunity to learn about how good people of the world responded and not just what the terrorists did to us. And that an appropriate way to mark the day is through doing good deeds. And so that's been really gratifying to see grade school students and college students really get behind this. And John Jay certainly has been there with us for years, participating in the meal packs and in other ways. I mean, what your institution does to mark 9/11 each year, the anniversary of 9/11, is really pretty remarkable, and should be a model for other institutions like yours to follow, I must say. But we're very encouraged by the fact that more and more people participate in not only the programs that we directly run, but in general in the National Day of Service each 9/11. I think it bodes well for the future.
I just want to touch, get a little feedback there. May have to mute someone. I'm not sure who. I want to touch on, you mentioned earlier the common humanity and the sort of miraculous thing that happens. Folks are more likely to volunteer around 9/11 commemorating activities or acts. So, what do you think is behind that? Is it a sort of a national, I want to say pride, but what is that?
You know, I think there's goodness in everybody. Sometimes it's hard to see that, but I do think, you know, we're not born to be divisive. That's something that we learn. And you know, when the chips are down, and you know, in the work of all of my three colleagues here, you know, you probably see this every day. When the chips are down, people really do step forward. And there is great expression of our common humanity, and that, you know, we're nothing without each other, and that we all need to support each other, and that everybody needs a helping hand. And that message, that tenet, that core element of being in a society is so often lost when, even now, I mean, it's such a divisive time that we need organizations, I think, like those run by, you know, everybody who's participating in this panel. And sometimes it is a tragic event that unfortunately is the thing that reminds us that we're all in this together, and that it doesn't, or it shouldn't matter in the end where you are in the political spectrum, or where you live in the country, or what your religion or ethnicity is, or what your sexual orientation is, or what your age is, or how much money you have, or anything else. We all have an opportunity, for the most part, to be there for somebody else. And there will, as Lisa said, there's always going to be something else. There's always going to be, unfortunately, another tragedy, another need for people to come together and respond together. We don't get from here to there, though, without that common humanity. And I don't mean to preach, but you asked about it. And so it's important for us to remember that, and to pass that on to our children, and for them to pass that on to their children. It's a difficult time that we're all now living through, and certainly, you know, a pandemic doesn't help. But we all need to take a deep breath and, you know, kind of step back and remember that we're all human beings and have an opportunity and an obligation to help each other out. And I'll say one more thing.
Yeah, go for it.
You know, one of the things that has always made this country great is our diversity, is our differences, is our ability to talk with each other about our differences. We should embrace those differences and celebrate our differences. And not everybody has to agree on everything, but we do all need to embrace each other and help us, you know, chart this journey through life. So
Okay.
there, I've said it.
Just want to say there's a comment in the peanut gallery. It says preach. so just FYI, I think you were hitting the mark there for all of us. There was some mention of the dexterity of organizations that maybe it's not their specialty, but in a time of disaster, they may shift to providing services in a different way. And so, Vilma, I'm just curious, what did that look like for Safe Horizons? Did the mission permanently change, or like what did that look like in the midst of things?
No, it didn't. And I really appreciate that, because I have such great respect for colleagues who were doing the day in, day to work. You know, I reflect back to a family member whose son, I'll just say trauma alert, was murdered the day before 9/11. And this family needed services. The world was turned upside down on 9/11, but we could not forget that and that's the beauty of people, the organization foundation, that our colleagues were doing the hotline work. They were doing that on-site work while others were doing this, because sadly you did have families that were impacted by violence and abuse, rape, sexual assault, you know, a homicide. You couldn't say, oh, we're going to put a pause to that, you know, and you didn't want it to become like this has power and control, like this is more, you know, than you know. It's again, the being responsive to everyone at that point. I think that was something that, you know, while I was doing this work, I was also doing the other work. You know, you had to find that balance. And that's what I brought up about the self-care. You know, you needed to find that balance, but I thought the organization was still there. Our hotlines never shut down. They were still there responding. Our shelters, you know, the work in criminal court, family court, that continued, and that needed to continue. You could not deny others who were in need. We know that this was happening and, you know, impacting the world and impacting our city, but we also knew that we could not shut the doors down because there was a need for services, and that continued. And, you know, great respect for the colleagues who continued that work day in and day out, and our leaders that supported us in doing it. And you also needed to get that message across too, that we were there, because you didn't want someone to think, oh, because of 9/11, I'm not going to be seen. No, you will be seen. You know, you need someone to assist you to forget a family order protection. Yes, we will have somebody there for you. You didn't want, because people sometimes, I remember speaking to a survivor that felt like when she called me, well, Vilma, I know that you're doing, but, and I was like, no, Mrs. So-and-so, it's about you now. How do I respond to you? It's not about what I'm right now is you and I having this dialogue. This is important that we still stay connected. I didn't want her to feel like I'm not going to be responsible to address those concerns because I'm assisting other families as a result of 9/11. So, you know, and that was important. The message got across.
I think you're touching on something important for people who are seeking help or in need. And when there's a major tragedy, they say, well, you know what, I'll just sort of sit over here quietly. I just did it with the local police department. I was like, my problem's small. There's people being murdered. So thank you for the mindful triage that you were practicing in the midst of the tragedy.
And that's important even to today. Sorry to interrupt. Though we're dealing with COVID and the pandemic, I mean, you're right. Our doors are still open. Maybe the doors may be closed, but the work is done remotely, you know, because despite this, we still want that message that we're there as best that we can manage it. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So let's move right to the lessons learned. Let's just be very clear about the lessons that were learned through this, that maybe you took forward or your organization implemented in some way through practice and procedure. So lessons learned. Did we get it right in terms of support services for first responders and affected families? And anyone can take that question.
Well, you know, when you say first responders, I mean, one of the things that became very apparent after 9/11, as far as I'm concerned, as the brother of two volunteer firefighters, one of whom, of course, perished on 9/11, is that we have a much greater appreciation for what firefighters do for us every day, every year, year after year. I think it's easy to take first responders for granted, but when you see what happened on 9/11 and in tragedies since, I do think that there is a needed and much greater appreciation for what first responders do. And so I'm grateful for that. Lisa may not share their perspective, but from my seat, that is what I have seen. And I even, on a personal point of view, have a greater appreciation for what my brother did all the time. You know, as a family member of somebody who was just, you know, constantly running from the dinner table to go fight a fire, or show up at a car accident or do the many things that firefighters do, you kind of get numb to it. But then when they don't come back, it's a very different story, you know? And so I am more amazed by my brother and all of those who do and did what he did each year. And yet, so many first responders and others were not treated as well as they should have been after 9/11 as a result of their great sacrifice and their exposure to toxins. And it took our federal government, you know, years before they funding, you know, proper funding came through to take care of them. with, diseases and illnesses that they've suffered and will suffer for the rest of their lives. And of course, some have perished since. So there is that kind of mix there, that struggle. But a lot of progress has been made in that way.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with Jay. I mean, one of the things, I'm always honored when I get to attend the conference of voices September the 11th, and it saddens me when they talk about the number of people who have died from that. I remember the first conference I attended, I mean, my colleague said, shut your mouth, because my mouth was just open. It was just like, I've heard about the deaths, but when you hear the number, those are individuals. That's just not a number. Those are family members. Those are loved ones. So that was just like, wow, that really impacted me. And to hear someone speak about the challenges that he, she, they, them are trying to get medical benefits. I'm like, are you kidding me? Really? That doesn't make any sense to me. That still troubles me, that that just gets you angry and, upset. Like, 20 years later, we still haven't worked this out yet. How do you justify that? That just gets me kind of ticked off and angry. And I think what I've, often hear from the families is initially we were doing like the how-to, and I'll speak for myself, is like, get the service out. And I think the mental health issues were not really addressed in the beginning. I think I saw some of that when we moved over to the peer and it became a family assistance center, that it became a little bit more holistic and people were talking about feelings. So while you were helping someone maybe to do an application, but then, just checking in with them. Yes, it's important that this person gets food, and this is important this person gets a place to stay, but also talking about it, because you were so inundated with the media, those constant images, like nonstop over. And even to this day, I don't understand why they still have to have those images. People know what happened in 9/11. You don't need to show it, because that could be, traumatic for someone to relive it at that moment. You don't know where that person is at. So I think, if that's something that I think educated me, is when I do respond and assist someone who's dealing with, whether it's disaster or the immediacy of it. Yes, I may be there to do the delivery of services, but I also need to schedule some time and plan some time for this individuals, like where he or she, they, them are at their story right now. You're eating, you're sleeping, or any images coming to you, feelings that you're experiencing. How do I communicate with my kids? My kids don't understand what, so-and-so isn't coming back home tonight. How do you put that into, how do you start this conversation? So definitely I felt like that was a learning process for me, not just doing the delivery of services, but really having that time to really check in with the person, and that also doing a little bit of both.
Is it safe to say that we got the service delivery part right, but maybe not the self-care, long-term health and mental health right?
On a personal level, I'll say for myself, I mean, that's something that I did appreciate, that it was happening at the Family Assistance Center, at the pier. That's where, the beauty, there were times where I would literally just walk around and just see that. You felt it, that people were helping you, but they were also checking in with you, and also checking in with the service providers as well. Anybody who walked through that door, even to the point, like, just, did you eat today? Right. I just thought, like, oh my God, that's good. I don't think I did. Thank you for checking in with me, or even when someone came in and you could say, hey, did you have, hey, it's 10 o'clock. Did you have breakfast? And someone was saying, no. Hey, can I offer you, and start breaking bread with that. So I felt at the Family Assistance Center, I definitely felt like that cohesiveness, that really, to me, it was like a community. Everybody was there, was checking in on you. Constantly, you have people saying, hey, you need anything? How you doing? Hey, even if you just wanted to sit and just talk to somebody, like there was somebody there. If you wanted to play a game, somebody was like, here's a play, he could play here. It was really a place of just trying to create a sense of community.
Yeah. And so, Lisa, one of the our attendees wants you to chime in and maybe touch on the first responder comment.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Vilma.
So, have we gotten it right? Have we gotten it right now? I think was the question, right? Have we applied those lessons learned? And, during the COVID-19 relief effort at the very beginning of when we realized this was a pandemic, it was an eerie replication of services that we provided, the World Care Center provided, that made me feel very much like I was back delivering personal protective gear to the first responders in and around ground zero. We didn't have the visuals, we didn't have the smell, we didn't have the group of responders all in one place, but we delivered hundreds of thousands of personal protective items and 95 masks, gloves, Tyvek suits, because we had them for known as the repository to be able to redistribute these items. So did we get it right? No, I don't think that we did 100% get it right, or World Care Center would be out of a job. We wouldn't have had to get on the ground and hand deliver N95 respirators to our first responders, to our nurses and doctors, to our volunteers that were on the front line. Those items should have been readily available for them, and they should not have had to have gone home and make an impromptu kind of mask to protect themselves. So, I know we're working towards these solutions, but I don't think that we're 100% there. On the side of spontaneous volunteerism and the really uplifting and empowering, and what are those words that you gave me, the empowerment and the stewardship of those local volunteers and local leaders, FEMA, indeed, Craig Fugate, has enacted the mantra of whole of community. If you survive a disaster, then you become a responder, you become a ready responder. And we could not have been more happy to hear those words out of his mouth, and guiding FEMA to really take on that mantra. We can't do it ourselves. We need the locals. More has to be done to get those resources down to the local level. Yes, it's great now that you've acknowledged we can't do it alone. It's great now that you not acknowledge that the local individual has to emerge as a volunteer, and that local leader has to switch and be a disaster manager. But now, where are those resources? We've developed tools, we've developed training, and we have a limited amount of resources at World Care Center. But now really, all right, a disaster has stricken. Where are our community leaders, and how do we get them the resources they need to do the job? So we've acknowledged it. We are saying, yes, we need you. But now how do we get those resources equitably distributed to those local leaders that really own the responsibility to their community? And it shouldn't be a pass through. It shouldn't be a funnel down into. It shouldn't be a re-grant from a larger institution to re-grant to another institution, so that by the time you get to the little guy, there's literally 65% of that grant left to go to them, right? It needs to go to those community leaders. So I think that we are on a very good path. I think that we have adopted those lessons learned and applied them. I think that there is more work to be done. And yes, we always have to remember that we have to take care of ourselves. So thank you, Vilma. And, and I have to say, Jay has always been a compassionate in sharing his lessons learned, and a kind word to a fellow colleague. I think that he epitomizes how we have to treat each other, as organizations and as people that are wanting the same thing but may approach it differently. So yes.
So before I go to Gary, Jay said that he sees a higher appreciation for first responders. You're a firefighter, and he has personally a higher appreciation. But what's your perception of the public, the general public, and their engagement with first responders?
So
sort of
I,
going
I
back to pre 9/11.
Sure. So I actually think that I think that we appreciate our firefighters. I think people are a little bit more fearful of police officers. Ooh, what did I do wrong? Did I speed or what have you? I think that we do appreciate them, but I think that there's a maybe a lack of understanding. And sometimes the resources that they don't necessarily get to do their job safely. For me, I just actually became a firefighter in my town. So I just passed. I've been a probationary firefighter for 9 months now. I passed firefighter one. I'm an interior firefighter, and I can tell you that I didn't, even working with the fire department, even working with firefighters for the last 20 years, I had no idea the depth of knowledge that you have to have. All of the different things that we respond to, Gary touched upon them: car accidents, how a tree falling on a house, not just house fires. So, and what they do as the glue in the community. So even after working with firefighters from the outside looking in, I had no idea. I do want to say that while I think that people are very fond and very appreciative of firefighters and of first responders, you can't possibly know all that they do, but please do know that they need protection. They deserve the protection to do their job. Nurses, doctors, firefighters, disaster volunteers, if we are going to ask them to be on the front line, then give them the damn stuff they need to stay safe.
Agreed.
That's what I have to say.
Thank you. Gary, can we get some lessons learned and any commentary on whether we got it right or not?
Gosh, it's such a great question. I was going to say, just a couple small things to add. I don't think we got it right, but I do think it began a series of learning, and I think one good thing that we've come to, and in COVID especially, we've been able to to work to be better at, is the recognition that any volunteer, whether it's during times of disaster or whether they go to their local food pantry weekly, is witnessing trauma, right? They're interacting with members of the community who have themselves experiencing trauma, and the person giving back does not necessarily know how to process that, right? So, I mean, this is a bit operational to New York Cares, but we know when somebody starts volunteering more than a certain amount, it's time to check in, right? Because they're filling their calendar and they're also filling themselves with a lot of emotion and probably a need for support. I think the second lesson learned, and I keep saying we didn't get it right and we keep not getting it right, to Lisa's point, but I just want to call out the phrase she used, which I thought was so excellent, was equitable distribution, right? One of the things that we know, interestingly, 9/11, because of the very tight geographic location and an ability to identify individuals who are impacted nearby, gave us an opportunity to learn some lessons. And however, now, whether it's Hurricane Sandy, whether it's COVID-19, we do see that the pouring out of help, the distribution, not just of volunteer hours, but of the stuff that people need, does not happen in an equitable way. And I think in our entire society, we're seeing that takes a huge amount of awareness, amount of prioritizing, and frankly, somebody to be in charge of it, because we keep seeing as a society that we resolutely don't think about it until after the fact, way too often. So I think those two lessons came out of that time. I do agree. I think there's a different kind of respect for public service than there was, that I remember from the 90s, just the recognition of what what people do, whether it's as a, a paid firefighter, whether, it's a volunteer, just a better recognition of what that is and a better respect for it. So a couple little things to add there.
I've made note. Thank you for that. So if you have a question for our panelists, please drop that in the chat box now. I've put 5 things as we move away from this discussion for our panelists to just make whatever comment they like to make on it in the chat box. So our funding models around service, manpower, training and preparation, hint, hint, Lisa, donation management, and volunteer management. These tend to be the biggest challenges with disasters. And so the lessons that you just talked about, if you have your own remedies that you'd like to share with the attendees around these major themes, especially around equitable distribution, self-care, equipment, and preparing responders, we would love to leave our attendees with your final comments. Thank you. Lisa, unmute.
You want us to chat that, or you want us to talk about that?
No, you can talk about it. The folks that are attending will send their questions or comments in the chat box.
Okay, let me know if my voice goes out, and I'll turn off my video. So David just mentioned, how does one prepare for an emergency such as Tropical Storm Sandy? I assume, David, you're speaking about Superstorm Sandy that struck. So funding.
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay,
I was in a business and we were closed for three plus months in Lower Manhattan.
Yes.
It was really horrible.
Yes. So I think it depends on if you're talking about a business and a corporation or a home, or even there's things that you can do infrastructure wise, like, putting utilities up on the second floor and not in the basement or on the first floor. As an individual, there are a lot of things that you can do about, having your plans in place, having a secondary location to go, having all of your resources in a go bag, and just really planning and practicing. And then to the questions that were posted previously with funding models, funding and reporting has gotten increasingly more difficult, I find, as a smaller organization. There's a lot of, now we probably spend at least half of our time reporting and writing reports and all of that. And that is challenging for a small organization. Manpower, I think that New York Cares certainly has the right model where they're training and having on hand those team leads. We follow the same model, whereas we want to make sure we have the team leaders in place that can take advantage of all of the goodwill that comes out and helps during disaster. So having that person that can manage others is, to us, absolutely critical. Training and preparation, there's a lot of different quotes, if you will, about, you fight how you train, right? And you respond how you prepare, you respond how you train. So we think that there are 3 tenets to training and preparation as far as what we do. 1 is the actual training itself. 2 is ensuring that people can connect with each other to share resources and know what each other is doing, so that they can work together. And the 3rd part, which we added 5 years ago, was practice, practice, practice. And so with the boots on the ground exercise, we're inviting everybody to come in and physically put to the test what they have learned and work with others. And so training and preparation, learn it, talk about it, do it with each other. Ken Curtin, our friendly FEMA voluntary agency liaison, who is retired, used to say the time during a disaster is not the time to exchange business cards, get to know each other beforehand. So that's part of all practicing together. And out of everything, I think the strongest thing for me that's come out of everything that we do is this concept of resilience, the concept that when you overcome and you add to your resiliency toolkit, you just don't bounce back. You bounce beyond your capacity. You build your toolkit to do more. And so I think that the resiliency component, the self-care component, which maybe, you know, we all maybe sometimes don't do a great job at all the time, you know, that's critical. And I think we're learning it and applying it.
We have some resources that were posted to the chat. Gary J. Vilma, any parting comments?
I'll just add to the piece of training and preparation. I mean, that's something that the organization takes very seriously. I mean, if folks are interested, you can go on our website, www.safehorizon.org, because it gets back to the piece about to be very trauma-informed, client-centered, you know, really making a connection, you know, with the risks, you know, lethality factors that come up with the population that we serve. So, and to the point that Lisa was saying, yeah, as part of my role as a supervisor, I'll be honest, this is a safe space to say it. I'm not good in self-care, but if you're part of my team, you got it. I'm going to be there 150% for you. So staff already knows that, you know, I'm not the person that I preach for others, but not for myself, but I'm learning. But yeah, self-care. Did you take lunch today? You know, taking a break. If you were working on a high risk case. I mean, I think, and also too, that we know that many of us have experienced trauma our own, you know, so now I maybe have experienced, I'm a survivor and now I'm assisting another survivor. So that is something too that our agency, you know, talks about it, because we do have folks that want to do this work because they want to give back. You know, I've, you know, met somebody recently at a community presentation who spoke about, you know, our organization was there when she had to flee her home with her kids and enter emergency shelter. And she's like, if you need for me to volunteer, let me know. Like, I want to help because somebody was there to help me and I want to pay it forward to somebody else.
Thank you for that. Gary?
I guess I'd add a couple quick reflections here. I think one, you know, speaking about volunteer management would seem to be the sort of the core thing I should do. But I think on all of these, and to Lisa's point, and backing up what Vilma said, there is, for all of us, it is hard to maintain a system, right, that we're not employing, right? When we're in times of non-disaster, right? How do we maintain those structures? And I can say, you know, funders, volunteers, right, become less interested. We kind of tend to collectively forget. And then all of a sudden we try to remember the day after something happens, right? And so for some of our institutions, it's our job to do the remembering while everybody else is kind of forgetting and going about their way, you know, and getting focused on other things. I think, you know, the other point though that I would really underscore that Lisa made is about relationships, and depending on the nature of the group, right? For New York Cares, that means making sure that we keep in touch regularly with all of our community partners, that we don't just know what they need in terms of a reading program or a hunger program, but that we actually get to know that community. And I would say COVID-19 taught us a very big lesson. There was a huge connection between the relationships that were deepest and the groups that called us for their help. Right? It made sense that they called New York Cares because we were there with them all the time, right? And they knew that we would think flexibly, we would come up with new programming, that we would go that extra mile. So you can't invest enough in whatever relationships matter to your particular organization. And then based on the forgetting, and maybe this is my handoff to Jay, you know, is to say, we do need those events that remind us not to forget, right? And you know, one thing I didn't say earlier is those big days of service, whether it's MLK Day, whether it's 9/11 Day, there's a values-based approach, right? That says, I believe in certain tenets. I believe that certain things should happen in our society, and I'm willing to step up. That may open the door for many. It may be a chance for others to, to sort of reassert their commitment. And it is a chance for our institutions like companies and schools to say, we believe in this, right? And we believe in this day of service, and therefore we're going to engage around it. So it's a huge portion of our not forgetting as a society.
Perfect. And Jay, you have 2 alley-ups from him, whether you picked them up or not. And you have the last 2 minutes.
All right. Well, it's a challenge to follow all the great things that were just said by my 3 colleagues here, but I will pick up on something Gary said, which is the never forget. You know, one of our organizational challenges is that so much of what our programming is all geared towards one day. You know, we work on it 365 days a year, but each year it's a really large lift to get the nation focused on the service component of 9/11. And we each year are faced with trying to find new ways to remind people during the course of the year how important it is, because it's not just about, it's not just about the focus on 9/11 and what happened that day, but on the lessons learned that we've all been talking about that came out of 9/11, and how we need to come together and pitch in, and we all have an opportunity to do good deeds for people, because there's need everywhere, every day, wherever you are. And so moving forward, that's one of the things that we're thinking about, new ways to engage people in those lessons year round, even though so much of our programming just happens on that one day each September. And we are finding those ways, through our education program and other ways too. But there's still a lot of good work to be done. And we're already thinking about the 25th anniversary of 9/11, 4+ years from now. So, but this 20th anniversary, I think, I was appreciative of the way the news media, the networks, companies, nonprofits, faith-based groups, municipalities, people not only throughout the country, but around the world, really paid attention to 9/11 and what happened, what we learned since, and where we need to go from here. So that's important. So to Gary's point, these milestone moments really are important, but we have to learn, we have to put a lot of effort into, for lack of a better term, merchandising that and making sure we use those opportunities in productive ways. For people who want to learn more about what we do and what we're all about, 911day.org is the website.
That is a perfect ending. I'd like to thank our panelists again and leave our attendees with "we remember so that we do not repeat," and also gratitude to the Teaching and Learning Center and External Affairs, and may our hearts be with Mindy and her family. You all enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you.